They allege that Heron is guilty of racketeering charges for running a drug dealing operation. They also claim he was involved in 3 and 3 attempted and introduced his music videos as evidence.
When you think of gang life, you probably picture guns, masks, and street fights, right? Well, that's just scratching the surface. Rod Diggs took things to a level so extreme, it'll leave you speechless. Imagine having one of his associates dressing up as a drag queen just to get close to his enemies, then taking them out.
So this guy decided to try to get some less time, that he was gonna work with the government against Rod Diggs, and actually went on the stand and testified about and he told the jury that he got the idea for dressing like a woman to do the from Rod Diggs.
The associate even claimed that Rod Diggs himself had used this disguise method before to carry out hits. He was on a whole different kind of ruthless. If there's one name that shook the streets, it's Rod Diggs. Not just a rapper, but a top dog in the gang world, running things in New York like a boss. His name wasn't just known, it was feared.
Downtown Brooklyn, a member and leader of the Bloods, the big homie, you know what I'm saying, of his set. And he's a very dangerous dude. Spent a lot of time in.
He started young hustling crack while living with his mom and sister, using their home as his stash spot. What started as small-time dealing quickly turned into a full-blown drug empire. But he wasn't just about street business. He also got into music, spitting raw lyrics that gave a glimpse into his wild world.
Born out of that, I was forced with a decision. Either I'm gonna starve or risk going to.
But with all that power comes enemies, and of course the feds. It was only a matter of time before things caught up with him. Right now he's locked up in one of the most dangerous prisons in the US, a DX Florence, and let's be real, if you end up there, chances are you're never walking out again.
In an exclusive interview, a former warden and a former inmate tell us death is easier than life at the federal supermax.
It is as isolated as the prisoners who call it home. The prison, called ADX Florence, is a tomb for the living.
To me, it's life after death.
Let's dive into the full story. Ronald Heron, better known as Rod Diggs, was born in 1982 and grew up in the Gowanus projects of Brooklyn, New York. Back then, the neighborhood was rough, nothing like the gentrified version it is today. Like a lot of kids in that environment, he got caught up in the streets early, running with gangs, especially the Bloods, and spending most of his teenage years bouncing in and out of lockup. Then came September 8th, 1998. A shooting went down in the nearby Wyckoff Gardens projects, and an innocent bystander lost their life. Fast forward to October 7th, 2000, and Rod Diggs himself got shot in the leg over a DDAT. But instead of just taking the hit and moving on, he had his cousins take care of business while he was still in the hospital. His shooter didn't make it. That moment only boosted his reputation in the streets. He even rapped about it on a track with Uncle Murder, spitting lines like, "I don't respect the shooter cause he shot me in the legs, and 2 days later the little homie was dead. See, if he was smart, he would have shot me in the head, cause I could get you shot from a hospital bed."
See, if he was smart, he would have shot me in the head, cause I could get you shot from a hospital bed.
By 2001, Rod Diggs was facing a charge for allegedly a man named Frederick Brooks, said to be a rival dealer. According to prosecutors, on June 16, 2001, he shot Brooks multiple times. Face, neck, back, even the back of the head, right in the lobby of 198 Bond Street. The Bloods helped him get rid of the gun, but the law caught up with him, and he was arrested a month later. The case against him seemed strong. The prosecution had 2 witnesses who gave recorded statements swearing they saw Rod Diggs pull the trigger and even picked him out of a lineup. But when it was time to testify, both backed out, saying they had been threatened. Another witness, who saw Diggs arguing with Brooks before following him into the lobby, was too scared to point the finger in court. One guy even admitted on the stand that he saw the MDM happen, but refused to name the killer, terrified of the consequences. And it wasn't just fear in the air. Rod Diggs and his crew made sure people knew what would happen if they talked. One of his affiliates, James Long, even called up a witness's mother at her job. Rod Diggs himself made direct threats. With that kind of pressure, the case crumbled, and he walked out of the courtroom a free man, bragging that he had beat the body.
Not brawl, he had beaten. He had beaten a murder case. Yeah, he had beaten a murder case. He beat a murder case and he was out.
But that was far from the last time he'd go head to head with the law. Through the early 2000s, Rod Diggs kept building his crew, the Amsterdamse Mad Dogs, running the D game out of 423 Baltic Street in Brooklyn. He was deep in the game, hiring dealers to push product, recruiting muscle to handle threats, and making sure no one messed with his stash houses. Extortion, robbery, you name it, he was involved. He did a short stint in prison for D-trafficking, but kept his operation running from behind bars. When he got out in July 2007, he picked up right where he left off, but now with another goal in mind, rapping. But make no mistake, the streets were still calling the shots. That same year, there was a local dealer. Court documents referred to him as John Doe, who was also slinging crack out of 423 Baltic. Rod Diggs wasn't having it. He sent 2 guys to rob him in a building lobby, and just as they were stripping him of his cash and diamond earrings, one of John Doe's friends, who also worked with Rod Diggs, walked in and tried to stop it. Didn't work. One guy pulled a gun while the other kept robbing him. Later, Rod Diggs ran into John Doe again, this time on the 12th floor of the building, and warned him to stay out of his territory. John Doe took a break from hustling for a while, but eventually came back, this time asking for permission to sell. Rod Diggs agreed, but only under one condition. He had to buy his product from him. Not only did John Doe comply, but he ended up working for Rod Diggs, handling deliveries and managing street dealers. Then came May 2008. A guy named Richard Russo was in the lobby of 423 Baltic, running his mouth about Rod Diggs, questioning his status in Gowanus and even threatening to kill him. Bad move. A few days later, on May 9th, Rod Diggs confronted Russo in that same lobby, told him to step into the elevator with one of his guys, and once the doors closed, he shot him dead. He then made sure his crew got rid of the weapon and any evidence, even paying people to keep quiet. But the violence didn't stop there. Rod Diggs also wanted a rival named Kendale Robinson, aka Smurf, taken out. Robinson had been involved in a bunch of violent incidents around the block where Rod Diggs was making money, and it was bad for business. So Rod Diggs and his guys spent weeks hunting him down. On September 13th, 2008, one of Rod Diggs' men finally caught up with Robinson outside 185 Nevin Street and shot him with a .40 caliber. Robinson survived, but that didn't mean the beef was over. And just to show how deep this cycle of violence ran, years later, in 2013, Kendale Robinson himself got sentenced to life without parole for something even more horrifying. At just 21 years old, he executed a 16-year-old girl named Althea Conyers because she pressed assault charges against one of his crew members. She tried to run, but he shot her 3 times, then stood over her as she begged for her life and fired 3 more bullets into her head. All of this because she refused to drop the charges. The streets had no mercy. Robinson, who was grinning and smirking the whole time during his sentencing, swore up and down that he was innocent. This was in 2013, but back in 2008, when he was just 16, he was already caught up in all kinds of chaos with Rod Diggs and his people. That same year, in November, Rod Diggs and his crew got into a heated dispute with another crew selling drugs in the Wyckoff Gardens projects. It all started when one of Rod Diggs' dealers was told by a guy named Victor Zapata that she couldn't sell there anymore. That didn't sit right with Rod Diggs' right-hand man, George Mussolini Mejia. So he went to confront Zapata. But on November 9th, 2008, that confrontation didn't go as planned. Mejia ended up getting shot 5 times. Rod Diggs and his crew didn't let that slide. They even filmed themselves visiting Mejia in the hospital, plotting revenge while he was still bandaged up in bed. They posted the footage on YouTube as part of an extended music video called Project Music, which has since been deleted. But according to a Daily News article, Rod Diggs looked straight into the camera and sent a warning to Zapata. See you soon in a cemetery near you. On December 23rd, 2008, just a month after Mejia got shot, one of Rod Diggs' guys was caught running from the police with a loaded .22 and body armor. Rod Diggs himself managed to slip away. Then, on February 26, 2009, Mejia was arrested in his apartment at 426 Baltic Street with a .45 and a stash of weed. The feds came down hard, and he ended up pleading guilty to felony gun possession, getting slapped with a 7-year sentence. But Rod Diggs wasn't done. He waited for his moment, and on September 27th, 2009, nearly a year after Mejia was shot, he finally found Victor Zapata. Without hesitation, he walked him down in the Wyckoff Gardens courtyard, shot him, and as Zapata hit the ground, Rod Diggs stood over him and finished the job. Barely a few days later, on October 1st, 2009, Rod Diggs and one of his homies got pulled over in a double-parked BMW on a busy street. Cops found a loaded 9mm with no serial number and evidence that it had been fired recently. He dodged serious trouble for that one, but more stories about his wild lifestyle kept surfacing. Sometime in 2010, though it wasn't revealed until testimony at his trial in 2014, Rod Diggs had an incident at a New York studio session with Dipset rapper Jim Jones. According to his own driver's testimony, Jim Jones wasn't too happy with the energy Rod Diggs and his crew brought into the studio, reportedly telling him, "Take that blood shit outside."
Jim Jones basically kicked Rod Diggs and his people out of the studio, basically saying, "Get that blood stuff in," basically, you know what I'm saying?
Rod Diggs wasn't the type to take disrespect lightly. As he and his guys stormed out, they shattered the studio's glass door on their way out. But the story didn't end there. Later that night, Rod Diggs and his crew tracked Jim Jones to a strip club in Mount Vernon called Sue's Rendezvous. As soon as Rod Diggs walked in, the DJ announced, "Rod Diggs in the building." And according to the driver's testimony, Jim Jones' eyes damn near popped out of his head like a cartoon character. He looked like he had seen a ghost, and he wasted no time getting out of there. Rod Diggs later spoke on the situation in an interview, brushing it off like it was nothing. He kept it vague, saying everything was all good now, but also made it clear that, yeah, he pulled up on him.
Punch Jim was popping, homie. Cat boy, I still with you already know. Shout out to Melly and everybody. I still in Harlem. It's all good.
One of the wildest and kind of hilarious arrests Rod Diggs ever had was over something as small as littering. He literally just dropped a gum wrapper on the ground, and a cop walked up to give him a ticket for it. But then the officer noticed something way more interesting. Rod Diggs was rocking heavy-duty body armor. The cop later said, "I've stopped hundreds of people in my career, and he's the first person I've ever seen wearing body armor." The next day, Rod Diggs got subpoenaed over the military-style vest, and the media ran with the story, trying to make it seem like this was the big moment that took down his whole operation. But let's be real, that was just a tiny piece of the puzzle. The government had been building a case against him for years, and things were about to come crashing down for real. Fast forward to October 5th, 2010, NYPD and the US Marshals were watching Rod Diggs like hawks. That night, they spotted him heading into Club Amnesia at 69 West 29th Street in Manhattan with two of his guys. The second Rod Diggs and his homies stepped out of the car. Cops swarmed them and took them down immediately. The driver, though, he wasn't trying to stick around. He hit the gas and sped off, but NYPD had him in cuffs within minutes. What makes all this even crazier is that while he was out here running a full-blown criminal empire, Rod Diggs was also vlogging and pushing his rap career hard. He even landed a feature on Waka Flocka Flame's debut album, Flocka Valley, appearing on the song Live by the Gun alongside Uncle Murder. And let's just say his lyrics weren't exactly fictional. When you see me, you know that I got it on me, either the Desert Eagle, the Fifth Order. At 40, he shot me 5 times. 2 days later, he dead. Shooting at the 5 is committing a suicide.
Shot me 5 times, 2 days later, the nigga died. Nigga shooting at the 5 is committing a suicide.
He wasn't just rapping about street life. He was straight up confessing to things that actually happened. Like when he said 2 days later the shooter was dead. That was real. His Bloodset Murders, Mad Dogs MMD, he got charged for that too. And that, 4 Cal he mentioned, it was used in a hit by one of his guys. Everything he rapped about was real, and the feds took note. They even shot the Live by the Gun music video right in the Gowanus projects, making it even easier for prosecutors to link him to everything. Then there was his Slow Down remix, where he was basically bragging about the murder of Frederick Brooks.
On the Ave, to go and beat the body with an 18 beat. If you ain't never beat a body, then you ain't like.
And if you look closely at some of his videos, you'll even spot Shotty, the guy who later brought Tekashi 6AX99 into the non-Trey Bloods and is now serving a 15-year sentence himself. He made a cameo in Rod Diggs' You Got Me Effed Up video. proving how deep their connections ran. Even in his final months of freedom, Raw Diggs was going all in on his music. He was always repping Vanguard, his brand. And in the summer of 2010, just a month after his mother passed, he dropped what would become his most famous solo song ever, Eulogy, and the lyrics, chilling. Now while they talk about fiction, I'ma spit real rap irrefutable, try to dispute my facts. Man, I'm sick, only 14 years, but that's the last time I let a man see tears.
Now while they talk about fiction, I'ma spit real rap irrefutable, try to dispute. I'm sick, only 14 years, but that's the last time I let a nigga see tears.
That last line? He was talking about something from way back in 1994, when he was just a kid. He and his friends were playing a game of cops and robbers in a Brooklyn housing project, running around with toy guns, when a tragic mistake changed everything. His 13-year-old friend, Nicholas Hayward, was shot and killed by a police officer who thought the toy gun was real. The story even made the New York Times. Raw Diggs once recalled that day saying, Nick said he wanted to go down, and then playfully pushed a friend so he could be the first to run down the stairway. Moments later, he was gone. That moment stuck with him forever. But as we'll see, it didn't change the path he chose. And that path was about to come to an end. Raw Diggs' story was as wild as it was tragic. That toy rifle he was holding, the game he was playing with his friends, it all ended in an instant with a real bullet from a real gun fired by Officer Brian George, a young cop just doing his rounds for the housing authority. And even though that officer was seen openly crying as he was led away from the scene, the damage was done. For Raw Diggs, that moment stuck with him, and as he grew up, it seemed to push him further down the path he chose, one that led straight to a life sentence. By February 13th, 2012, the feds made it official. 23 charges, including racketeering, Emmerdale, conspiracy, attempted Emmerdale, robbery, gun possession, and de-trafficking. 3 of those charges were for Emmerdale alone. At one point, he was even facing the death penalty.
They allege that Heron is guilty of racketeering charges for running a drug-dealing operation in the Gowanus housing development where he grew up. They also claim he was involved in 3
And if that wasn't enough, just a month later, while sitting in solitary confinement, he somehow got caught with a cell phone, making officials suspect he was planning something bigger, maybe even an escape. But things took an even crazier turn when they started investigating how he got the phone and realized he might have been in a secret relationship with a female prison guard who smuggled it in for him. As much as his lyrics made for easy evidence, what really sealed his fate was all the people who flipped on him. One of the biggest names was Vincent Winfield, a former dealer turned cameraman for Raw Diggs' vlogs. Yeah, the same vlogs that helped build his rap persona. Winfield had already caught a gun charge back in 2008 when he and Raw Diggs got stopped by police. But while Raw got away, Winfield slipped on ice and got caught with 2 guns. He took a plea deal and was supposed to be out in a few years, but fighting and hustling inside got him extra time. So by 2010, he made a call to the feds and cut a deal. He'd testify against Raw Diggs in exchange for leniency. Then there was Rafael Gonzalez, better known as Fu, who was already locked up, serving a massive 20 to life sentence for a mix of drug charges, gun possession, and of course, murder. And when the time came, he didn't hold back. He told the feds everything. He broke down the whole operation, named names, pointed fingers, and gave them a detailed rundown of what went down at 198 Bond Street, the place where Frederick Brooks was killed. If there were any secrets left in Raw Diggs' crew, Fu made sure they didn't stay that way. And one of the people he put in the spotlight was Crystal Lewis, someone who had been a major part of the operation from a young age. Crystal had been in this life since she was barely a teenager. She first met Raw Diggs when she was just 14, and from that point on, she was locked in. She wasn't just some small-time dealer either. She was one of his top people, moving serious weight and even holding his guns when things got heated. And if that wasn't enough, she wasn't just handling the business side of things. She was there to witness some of the worst of it firsthand. But when the walls started closing in and the feds were handing out charges like candy, Crystal made her choice. She pleaded guilty, and just like that, she was on the witness stand, testifying against the man she once worked for. And then there was Joseph Garcia, aka Jojo, a guy whose story was maybe the most ironic of them all. See, Jojo didn't start out as one of Raw Diggs' soldiers. In fact, he was actually one of his victims. Once upon a time, Rod Diggs and his crew had robbed him. But instead of staying an enemy, JoJo ended up getting pulled into the operation. Rod Diggs apparently didn't like the idea of random dealers working outside his network. So at some point he decided JoJo would be better off working for him instead of getting hit again. And that's exactly what happened. JoJo became part of the crew, moving drugs under Rod Diggs' command. But just like Crystal, when the whole thing came crashing down, JoJo wasn't about to take the fall alone. He flipped, cut a deal, and played his role in putting Rod Diggs away. It's crazy because in a way, Rod Diggs saw this coming. He basically called his own fate in his song Eulogy, rapping, "I'ma wave the heat. I solemnly swear before I let them give me 120 years.
Swear before I let them give me 120 years, 120 years, imagine that.
And yet, that's exactly what happened. On June 26, 2014, after being found guilty of racketeering and 3 murders, Rod Diggs narrowly dodged the death penalty. But what he got wasn't much better. 3 life sentences plus 105 years. No parole, no second chances, just done. It was a long, wild ride from the Brooklyn streets to the rap game, from making music videos to running a criminal empire, from flexing on social media to sitting in one of the most dangerous prisons that houses the deadliest people you can ever think of. Rod Diggs spent years living the life he rapped about, but in the end, the life he chose came back to collect its debt. And this time, there was no escape.